Recording.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Smarter Campus Podcast, where we're changing education one conversation at a time. So today, guest here is Mike Kentz. Thank you so much for being here, an AI education consultant, a TEDx speaker, and the founder of Zane Techs and Educational Advisors. Mike, I really appreciate you being here. I'd appreciate if you could just let the audience know a little bit more about yourself and how you got into the space.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
My background is a little bit of a weird trajectory. I started my career as a financial journalist and then transferred or changed to become a middle school educator in New York for 6 years, and then moved to high school education and did that for 3 years and really wasn't an AI guy, was never necessarily the most tech savvy person in the room, but last year decided that I was going to teach and develop AI literacy in my students one way or the other. Wasn't sure how it was going to work, but I ran a bunch of experiments with my students in the classroom. And from those experiments, I felt like I had something to share. So I've started writing and speaking and trying to present as much as possible because I think this is kind of the question right now is how quickly can we train people in understanding how to use AI? And so from that, I launched my company, Zane Tech Educational Advisors. We offer professional development services, and here I am.
Well, that's amazing. So the thing I like to start off with is how'd you get introduced to this technology? Like, do you have a first time with ChatGPT moment or something?
Yeah, I will tell you that in November 2022, when it launched, and there was, of course, a firestorm, for lack of a better word, I immediately put the blinders on. I dug my head in the sand, and I didn't want anything to do with it. I was getting a creative writing degree at the same time, and I remember Jensen Huang, the first big quote from him was, "It's going to come for fiction writers first." I think he said that in December of 2022, and I was getting a degree in fiction writing, and I was like, "You have got to be kidding me." So I was very, very upset and very much not willing to engage for at least the first 8 or 10 months, I would say. Even my department head at my school, my high school, would send us articles, not necessarily with a big ask, but she would send them to me and I would immediately delete the emails because I was so frustrated and upset and annoyed that this thing is coming for me as an English teacher and a writer. I mean, how this feels so unfair. It felt so personal, to be honest with you. Um, but I've told this story a couple times, but I'll tell it quickly again. Over the summer of 2023, my principal asked us to read this book called Who Moved My Cheese? And yeah, it's a very famous business book, but it's sort of written in the form of a children's parable, so it's very easy to read, super digestible. And so we had to read it before a PD session, and I remember reading it, and it absolutely just shifted everything in my brain. And the whole theme of that story is like, we're all just looking for cheese. If we find it, great. But if someday somebody moves it, you got no choice. You got to get back out into the maze and find the cheese. And I remember asking myself at that moment, where, clearly as an English teacher and a writer and a journalist, my cheese has been moved.
Yeah.
Where
Mhm.
has it been moved and why has it been moved and how has it been moved? And the answer every time I asked that question was AI. And so I felt like I had no choice, frankly. I felt a little bit backed into a corner, but I decided, okay, I'm going to develop literacy in myself. I'm going to develop fluency in myself. I'm going to take classes. I'm going to learn things about it. And then I'm going to figure out how to teach it to my students. And it was really at that point when I started putting it in front of them and watching how they used it, trying to guide them as best I could, even though, especially at that time, and even still today, we really don't know exactly what the right way is to use these tools. It flipped my mind from being fully negative to being somewhere in the middle and recognizing that there are real problems with AI use, but there's also some incredible opportunities.
Mhm.
And so it's just kind of rolled downhill from there.
Okay, I mean that's something that I just filmed a podcast with someone else about how they were creative and it's a really scary time to be a creative right now, right? I
Yeah.
mean, they feel like AI is just gonna do your job. So, besides reading the book Who Moved Your Cheese, like what recommendation would you have for a person like that to kind of get out of that backed in a corner feeling, I guess?
Yeah, the other thing that I have tried to push out in front of people because I recognized it in myself and then I saw it in my colleagues is that when huge changes happen in our lives, whether it's personal or professional or otherwise, generally what happens is we are being asked to figuratively let go of something and
Mhm.
sort of embrace something new, and that's very uncomfortable for everybody. But I think it mirrors the process of grieving. And there's a model for handling the grief process, and it's called the 5 stages of grief.
Yeah.
And there are cognitive behavioral therapy tricks that you can use to help you move through those first 4 stages. So what I do is I do workshops on this where just present the idea like, is this actually grieving? Generally speaking, people tend to agree this does feel like grieving for most educators, especially humanities teachers, because you really cannot do things the old way anymore. And then from there, okay, let's create some space and let's consider the mental models that you need to do to flip your mindset and get to a place of acceptance where acceptance is not necessarily overzealous excitement and unfounded optimism, but it's somewhere in this balance space where, okay, this is the reality and I must live in the reality. I don't have a choice, but also I'm not going to fall back into that negativity of denial and anger and bargaining and depression because if I do, I'm going to get stuck and I'm not going to move forward. So, get to that balanced acceptance space and just take one just all you have to do is say to yourself, I just have to take one step every day or every week, whatever the number is, because as long as you're doing that, you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people need to hear that. I mean, I think one thing that makes people hesitant about stuff like that, I mean, the last 2 weeks have been wild by themselves. Like, how do you recommend an educator, professional like yourself, to kind of stay, moving forward, but you can't move forward at the rapid pace of the technology, right? It wasn't even really a question, but I think you know what I'm saying.
No, no, it is the question.
Yeah.
Literally last night I host this program I call Collaborative Reform for AI Focused Teaching. It's a little bit of a mouthful, so I call it CRAFT. But it's a bunch of educators. It's a free virtual program, and we kind of just chat, honestly. We share resources, we share ideas, share assessment protocols and things like that. But this was the thing that came up. What you just said came up multiple times during the hour-long session where university professors and K-12 educators, and these are AI forward educators. These are people who are like in there doing their best to stay on top of things kept saying I cannot keep up. I just cannot keep up. And that part is very frustrating. I think it's frankly a little unfair to the
Yeah.
average person, the average consumer. So if I had a silver bullet, I'd already I'd already have said it. I don't have a silver bullet. All I like to say is pick one thing at a time. And do not expect to stay on top of everything all the time. But if you pick one thing at a time and say, okay, I'm going to make sure I'm going to work with ChatGPT for the next couple of weeks, and then I'll come back to the news cycle. You know what I mean? You almost do have to create some distance between yourself and the news cycle because it is so overwhelming. And but come back to it, right? Give yourself a lag time and then come back and then dive back into something new and then come back. And if you create that kind of cycle, it can be a little bit more feasible.
Yeah. I mean, I struggle still.
Yeah.
It's insane. So do you think this is kind of better preparing people for real life, or do you think we don't really know what like the workforce is going to look like yet? If that makes, I know you're not higher education. Like, do you think AI is going to change how education is like inherently preparing you for the workforce?
I think it should.
Yeah.
I think the jury's out as to whether or not it will. I personally expect kind of a bifurcation across both the secondary school, the high school space, and the higher ed space, where you're going to see some people. I have to be careful with the language I use here. You're going to see some institutions. I don't want to say they're like fully adopting AI and doing everything with AI because that doesn't feel right to me. But they are being really, really thoughtful and they're recognizing, for example, in a writing course, for you to pretend that AI doesn't exist is it's just not realistic. You're not preparing people for the world if you're doing that. But I do also think that some pretty large swaths of education are not going to adapt. I feel pretty confident in that. Just based on the history of education, this tends to happen pretty consistently. But it should, to go back to what I said at the beginning, it should because as one of my colleagues said last night, he said, um, when I sign my contract to work, there's no part of my contract that says my job won't change. I expect
Yeah,
my job is, you know what I mean?
yeah, that's funny.
No one ever said that, when you sign the contract that it's not your requirements and responsibilities are not going to change. And that was from Aaron McKelkey, by the way, who is someone people should check out. And so that's what I think educators need to hear. They need to hear that your job does change. Our job as educators does change with society. If society changes, we change. That has to be a reality for educators.
Yeah. So, say I'm an educator at a K through 12 institution or college, and I kind of am forward on this. How do I speak up and kind of become a person like yourself, a thought leader, influencer in the area?
I started very simply with online courses. I think that's a very accessible and reasonable way to start because you can digest it at your own pace and you're not necessarily trying to keep up with one particular person or group. And so there are tons and tons of free webinars and free online courses that I think people should start with because it gives you a background. And then from there, conversation. Once you feel like you have a little bit of grounding, I never posted on LinkedIn my entire professional career until about 8 months ago. And now I post like almost every day. And at first, I was I was a little bit not comfortable with it. I was worried. I didn't know what it was going to be like. I cannot tell you the network of people that I have found via LinkedIn, via Substack. Now I'm on Blue Sky as well. I'd never really thought of social media platforms as a way to do this, but that's the second step. Get yourself some background, get yourself some grounding, take your time. You know, yes, it feels like everything is changing every single day, and in some sense it is, but also you've got a little bit of time. You have a little bit of time,
Yeah.
and then engage in conversation. If your colleagues, I like to say that last year I was in a collaboration desert. And that's not necessarily a knock on my colleagues. They just weren't in a place where they were ready to talk about AI. And that's part of the reason why I have the craft program is because I know there are other people out there like me, but they might not have colleagues to talk to in their building,
Yeah.
And so don't be afraid to post on LinkedIn. Don't be afraid to post your thoughts or comment on reach out to people directly. Start your own blog. You will be amazed at the feedback and reactions you get just by sharing your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. So you talk to a lot of educators, of course. So educators, what are people looking for, really? Like what is the thing that they need?
Wow.
Yeah,
So yeah.
question.
Okay, so I would group it into three different groups.
Right.
I'll start with the sort of AI forward folks because that's who we've been talking about so far.
Mhm.
The AI forward folks are very much looking for ways to change the minds of their administrators. They often say to me, my administrators are still not offering us professional learning. They still don't understand the shape of change or the scope of change, I should say, that's coming. How do I convince my administrator to actually start taking action? So that's for the AI forward folks who are hungry for more information and they're hungry for more learning. And then on the other end of the spectrum is the people who are still grieving, which we already kind of talked about.
Yeah.
But still, those people, if you talk to them, they have a very different, their narrative, their rhetoric, the way that they talk about this is extremely different. They are basically, they're either angry or they simply will not engage until somebody listens to them. And I think that's what I would, to answer your question, for that group, they need to be listened to. Those people are looking for someone to create space for them to speak their minds and get all that emotion out because you cannot learn if you are in an emotionally stuck place. And so get that out so that you can then learn. And then the middle group, which is probably, if it's 100%, that's probably the biggest percentage of people lives in the middle.
Yeah.
These are people who have reached acceptance. are dipping their toes in the water, are pretty uncomfortable. They have no clue who to listen to. That's a big one. They don't know who they can trust. They very much recognize that they should be skeptical of some of these people, even like me. Um, but they're not quite in that AI forward camp where they're like, let's learn, 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 learn. So that group right there, what they are looking for is trusted training. They're ready to learn, but they need to find someone they can trust that's going to teach them the in-depth mindsets and approaches that allow them to not only leverage the tools but stay safe. They want to stay safe, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, and the hard thing is you're kind of getting pushed by these giant conglomerate businesses, right? I mean, that's something that, I mean, I personally feel like isn't really even talked about enough. That, yeah, it's scary as a teacher to be have Sam Altman tell you what you need to do in your classroom. So like, I mean, what would you say about the current space right now? I know that's another huge question, but like, how do you feel about like the players that are there right now for educators?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I do sort of understand from, if we're talking about the heads of Google
Yeah.
and you know what I mean? Like I understand from their perspective, they got a business to run and they are very probably afraid of losing this race. And so they are not really thinking, I would imagine they are not thinking about the health of society during this turbulent time. I don't think they are concerned with educators' mindsets and emotional health and mental health during this time at all. I don't think they are concerned. I think they expect that the advancements will erase the negatives. I
Mhm.
think they just sort of think on a long enough timeline, all the negatives, yes, they'll happen, but we'll overcome them through the advancements. So it is very frustrating. I always try to bring a super skeptical eye to the things that they produce. Um, I don't know. Again, going back to what you said about a new release every day, depending on what you listen to, you could either think that like Grok AI is about to crack a code on scaling and they're gonna, take over the entire market in January or February. I heard that on a podcast recently, which blew me away. Or you could think, OpenAI has a certain captive user base at this point. I know that like I have a hard time not just opening up ChatGPT. I don't go to Gemini very often. I don't go to these other platforms because I am a captive user at this point. I'm so used to it. Um, but as it pertains to education, I don't think they have our best interests in mind, and I think that's why vigilance and training are the answer right now.
Yeah.
You can't resist it, but you do need to be vigilant.
Yeah, Paul Matthews. I don't know if you follow him on LinkedIn. He's an Australian K through 12 educator, and he always says teachers need two T's. It's time off and training, and
Yeah.
I think that's just great, and I think lots of people should kind of know about that. So one of the last questions, we're kind of wrapping up on the time here, is if you could snap your fingers and change education, what's happening after you snap your fingers?
Uh, I think, oh man, in a perfect world,
Yeah,
standardized tests are terrible, and I don't think it's fair to say they disappear completely, but I would like them to change dramatically and possibly go away completely. I think project-based learning with with teachers focusing on the process of learning and the process of thinking and not so much the product is absolutely the answer here. Because as we know, AI can produce all of these products and outputs that we're used to looking at and saying, oh, this is proof of my students' thinking. It's
yeah,
just not proof anymore, right? So big projects, big real world projects, with lots of evaluation of the process happening along the way with, some looking at the product too, but knowing that, for most of our products, AI can produce that. So from that, I think we start to change the product. Right now
yeah.
we can't even perceive of what products we should be asking students to create yet. But by analyzing their process and pushing them to be better in the middle, that's when you start to get more creative and create really amazing things.
Yeah, I think that's great. So the last question I always ask people is, what do you use AI for outside of education? Like my example is I love it to use it for cooking. I like to take a picture of the fridge and say, what can I whip up with the things in here? But
Yeah, cooking and writing. Cooking
okay.
and writing. Now the writing is about education, but I use it on pretty much every blog that I write, and I find it very, very helpful. And cooking as well, because I don't know anything about cooking. I don't do the picture move though, partially because I mean, if it can't see all the labels, like, is it really going to know what you have? You know?
I don't know. I mean, sometimes it's pretty funny. Like some of the things it's came up with where I mean, I don't have a super full fridge, so that's a little difference, I guess. But I mean, it's funny. Over Thanksgiving, I made a ham. It's a funny story. And I took a picture of like all the cabinets, and I was like, I want it to be like barbecue, a little smoky, and then it like pulled like two things from my fridge, three things from the cabinet, and then like a few things from the counter, and I made it, and it was awesome. And I'm actually I want to make a cookbook with because I have just a chat GBT cooking like
Yeah,
project now, and I'm
yeah,
super curious about it. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. I've had some
yeah.
funny responses. The last few people have told me they use it for Christmas shopping.
Yeah,
Uh,
I've used it for that too, actually. I mean, I use it for web search too. It definitely, I don't use Google at all anymore.
yeah,
Um,
I'm curious about that. What do you do? Do you just use GBT
yeah, I
or
use GPT. I just Perplexity, the interface just isn't familiar to me yet, so I just use Search GPT. And
that's
it's
cool.
it's pretty good. It's pretty good. A lot of times it just gives me a Wikipedia source, and so I'm like, okay. So I'm going from, I like to think of Search GPT as basically Wikipedia anyway.
Yeah.
I need to click through the links anyway. So it's like I'm going from Wikipedia to Wikipedia, and then I finally get to the source where I can actually evaluate it and figure out if it's credible. But I just think like the ability to ask a sort of multi-layered question instead of just putting in search terms, to me, is a big deal because sometimes I don't know how to describe what I'm looking for,
Yeah.
you know?
And like people, I mean, I'd love to talk about this actually, which is really
Yeah.
funny. It's like SEO is a thing that people don't really realize is applicable. I mean, it's like when you search on these big conglomerate search engines, I mean, you're just finding who paid the most money to get their name at the top when you search it, and it's like I kind of agree with you on that, is that I like to search on GBT or Perplexity because you kind of work around that weirdly.
Yeah.
But I don't know, that's going to be an interesting future of life, I guess, that I haven't even really thought about until right now. But Mike, thank you so much for being on the show. I want to wrap it up here so we can keep it short, but I really appreciate the time and everyone listening. See you again soon.